I regret divorcing my husband. One conversation with my son made me realize I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. Now it's too late. Hello Reddit I plus here. I'm a 43-year-old woman and I honestly don't know whether I'm looking for advice or just somewhere to confess the biggest mistake of my life. People always say, you don't appreciate what you have until it's gone. I used to roll my eyes whenever I heard that. Now I know exactly what it means. 5 years ago, I divorced my husband after 16 years of marriage. We have one son together who is now 17. At the time, I convinced myself the marriage had become boring. There were no dramatic fights, no cheating, no abuse, no addiction. Nothing you could point to and say, that's why the marriage ended. I just kept telling myself I deserved more excitement. My friends kept talking about finding themselves after divorce. Social media was full of women saying life really begins at 40. Everywhere I looked, people acted like choosing yourself was the bravest thing you could do. I bought into it. My husband, Simon, wasn't flashy. He wasn't romantic in the movie sense. He wasn't constantly buying expensive gifts or planning surprise vacations. He was simply dependable. Back then, I mistook dependable for boring. I cringed just typing that. About a year before our divorce, my father passed away after a long battle with heart disease. Before he died, he gave me a small jade plant that had sat on his office desk for over 20 years. He always joked that as long as the plant stayed alive, a part of him would always be around. I've never been able to keep plants alive. I've killed succulents. I've somehow managed to kill cactus plants. But this little jade plant survived. I actually became proud of it. Whenever friends visited, I'd point at it and laugh. I finally found a plant that can't be killed. I genuinely believed I had somehow developed a green thumb. Life moved on. Simon moved into a townhouse across town. We shared custody. Everything stayed polite but distant. He never badmouthed me, never argued over money, never missed picking up our son. Eventually, I started dating. The excitement I'd imagined never really happened. Most of the men I met loved talking about themselves. One disappeared after 3 months. Another lied about being divorced. One wanted a mother more than a partner. Meanwhile, Simon remained single as far as I knew. At least that's what I assumed. Last month, everything changed because of the dumbest argument imaginable. Our son wanted to spend the weekend at a beach house with friends. Some of the older kids were going. I wasn't comfortable with it. He insisted everyone else's parents had already agreed. I still said no. He got frustrated. Then he snapped, "Of course you'd say no. Dad actually trusts me." That irritated me immediately. I told him I didn't want to hear comparisons. He rolled his eyes. Then he muttered something that completely stopped me. "You know Dad always took care of Grandpa's plant, right?" I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He looked confused. "You seriously didn't know?" "I honestly had no idea." He sighed. "Mom, that plant died years ago." I laughed because I thought he was joking. It never died. It did, like 5 or 6 times. I just stared. He continued. Dad kept replacing it with another jade plant whenever it couldn't be saved. He'd drive all over town trying to find one that looked almost identical. My stomach dropped. "No. Yes." I kept shaking my head. "No, that's impossible." He looked almost annoyed. "You really never noticed?" Then he said something that shattered me. After the divorce, Dad asked me to help him. He said, "Your mom believes that plant keeps her father's memory alive. If replacing it helps her smile, it's worth every penny." I couldn't breathe. Our son wasn't finished. He taught me how to prune it and water it properly after he moved out. Whenever I came back from his house, he'd ask me how the plant looked. I sat down because my knees suddenly felt weak. He quietly added, "He made me promise I'd never tell you." Then my son walked upstairs, leaving me sitting alone in the kitchen. I couldn't stop crying. Not because of the plant, because suddenly I remembered everything else, every single invisible thing Simon had quietly done for 16 years. Every winter morning, my car was already warmed up before work. I always assumed remote starters were just convenient. We didn't even own one. He'd been going outside every freezing morning. Whenever I complained about running out of shampoo, somehow another bottle appeared. The smoke detector batteries never beeped. The trash cans somehow reached the curb before sunrise. The dog's medicine was never forgotten. The bills were always paid early. My favorite cereal never disappeared from the pantry. The coffee machine somehow knew exactly when I woke up. The electric blanket was already warm before I got into bed. My phone was always charged. When I got sick, soup magically appeared. If I had a stressful week, he'd quietly order my favorite takeout without asking. Not once did he say, "Look what I did." He simply loved me through actions, thousands of tiny actions. I mistook consistency for a lack of passion. The more I thought, the worse it became. I couldn't remember the last thing I'd done purely to make his life easier. Everything had become about what I felt I deserved, nothing about what I contributed. For days, I barely slept. Finally, I called him. He sounded surprised but friendly. I asked if he'd like to meet for lunch. He agreed. The entire drive there, I imagined different versions of the conversation. Maybe he missed me too. Maybe he'd been waiting. Maybe we'd laugh about everything. Maybe this could still be fixed. He looked healthier than I remembered. He'd lost weight. His smile looked genuine, not forced, not polite, just peaceful. We talked about work, our son, life. Eventually, I took a deep breath. I've been thinking about us. He nodded. I figured. I made a mistake. He stayed quiet. I don't think I appreciated everything you did. Still nothing. Finally, I asked, do you think maybe we could try again? He looked down at his coffee before answering. His voice was gentle. I wondered if this day would come. Hope exploded inside me. Then he continued, but it came about 3 years too late. I felt my chest tighten. He smiled sadly. I'm seeing someone. I asked if it was serious. He nodded. Very. I whispered, do you love her? He answered without hesitation. Yes. I wanted to disappear. Then he reached across the table and said something I'll never forget. You know what the biggest difference is? I couldn't speak. She notices. I looked at him. If I make her tea, she thanks me. If I fold the laundry, she smiles. If I fix something around the house, she tells me she appreciates it. He wasn't trying to hurt me. That made it worse. He continued quietly. I spent years feeling invisible. I started crying. I never meant to make you feel that way. I know. You were never cruel. You just stopped seeing me. I apologized over and over, for everything, for taking him for granted, for assuming he'd always be there, for believing ordinary love wasn't enough. He listened. Then he smiled. I forgave you a long time ago. I actually thought that meant there was hope. Then he finished. But forgiveness isn't the same as wanting your old life back. I couldn't even argue, because he was right. Before we left, I asked one last question. Why did you keep replacing the plant after the divorce? He smiled. Because your father loved you. Then he stood. And because I did too. He wished me well, paid for lunch before I could stop him, then walked away. I watched him leave without looking back. That was 3 weeks ago. Yesterday our son told me he'd finally met Simon's girlfriend. Apparently, she's kind. She volunteers at an animal shelter. She bakes cookies that my son says are better than mine. He smiled while telling me about her. I realized something. He wasn't replacing me. He was simply happy that his father had found happiness again. I went home and looked at the jade plant sitting on my windowsill. For the first time, I noticed the tiny tag hidden beneath the pot. It wasn't old. It was from a local nursery. The date was only 8 months ago, even after all these years. Simon had quietly replaced it one final time, not because he wanted me back, not because he expected gratitude, simply because he had kept one last promise to a man who loved his daughter. I cried harder than I ever have in my life. So here I am. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I can't ask him to leave someone who appreciates him just because I finally opened my eyes. I genuinely hope he's happy. I just wish I hadn't needed to lose him to understand what real love actually looked like. Has anyone else realized far too late that they threw away the person who loved them the most? How do you live with knowing you're the reason your own happy ending disappeared?